There's an awful lot to love about digital audio advertising and the targeting, the engagement, listener loyalty, attribution, as well as if you're using promo codes. Yet some brands have been very reluctant to use audio or explore streaming and podcast advertising because of the lack of confidence in the creative. We've been specializing in writing and producing award-winning advertising for 30 years, and it's our belief that there isn't a product or a category that can't exist in an audio, in compelling audio. But it does need to be compelling. It has to be unskippable, because we're up against that knee-jerk reaction to be able to depart anything that doesn't actually draw us in or isn't engaging. But sadly, the majority of recorded ads fall short, in our opinion. And according to Kantar cross-media database, the creative quality accounts or contributes to nearly 50% of your media impact. So if you're considering audio advertising, you need to know who's making the ad, who's writing the ad. Because an experienced audio creative will know that how to tap into the emotional benefits of a product and not necessarily try and compete with visual, but find the other part of the brand that is actually going to be even more compelling and tap into something that's going to change our behavior. And that's where audio's power lies. So to prove it, we've taken 3 audio virgins, and they have traditionally relied on visual advertising and created audio ads that elicit pictures in the listener's mind, and that the ads tap into their feelings, tap them into the feels, which is where all the power lies, as I said.
Yeah, but as you know, you can have the best creative in the world, but if it's not being heard by the right people, then it's completely pointless. An example I like to give of this is when I was on a 12-hour bus journey in Vietnam, and I was binging my favourite show, A Short History Of, which has 85% male audience, yet I was served an ad in excess of 40 times encouraging me to seek help with the menopause, which obviously I didn't end up doing. So with advertising, there's always going to be wastage, but the beauty of podcasts is that you can be so highly specific in your targeting, you can more or less eliminate it. You just need to have a really good understanding of the entire podcast landscape and put together both the best podcast networks and the independent podcasters, and that's what we'll take you through now. So Ralph will go through the indicative creatives, and I'll go through a top-level sort of media plan.
Okay, so the first brand is Hendrick's Gin. As you can see from their out-of-home, they have a very distinctive visual language and almost a sort of Jules Verne, Great Gatsby-style look. But sadly, there were no audio brand codes for us to utilize, so we looked at the tone of the brand. And Hendrick's has a whimsical tone of voice, very engaging way of talking, sort of poetic, little old-fashioned, but most importantly, it's very unique. And the brand is always about trying to challenge people to break the mold of everyday conventions and step into a world where things are a little more interesting. Flavor is their sort of major key difference, and they are really trying to own the cucumber, which is an expression or a sentence I won't ever say again. Moving very quickly on. What better way to hear the creative than in the context of a podcast that would be relevant for it to appear in? So cue our resident podcast media specialist, Andy, to tell us which podcast this would be appropriate for.
Yeah, so we spoke to Hendrick's, asked them about their target audience, and they said to us, really premium white spirit drinkers, between the age of sort of 25 to 44, interested in fashion and on the higher end of the pay scale. So as you can see, we've just pulled together a few examples here of where we can find this audience. So Shameless with Shameless Media would be a sort of flagship example to get the reach. And this is a podcast about pop culture for smart people that like dumb things. So 70...
It's their words, not ours.
Yeah. Exactly. I love it. And their audience is 76% between the age of 18 and 34. So we can be sure that we're getting most of the target audience there. And you can go even deeper into looking at the hosts, who, as you can see, are very fashion conscious, partial to a ski trip, and obviously an Aperol or a white wine spritzer. So we can assume that our audience are also kind of the same as them. The next example, whereas we might not get the reach, the Business of Fashion podcast gets about 2,000 monthly listens in Australia, we can be absolutely sure the people that's listening to this are fashion professionals keeping up with the latest trends. And similar to our last one, Mindful Biz podcast gets about 4,000 downloads each month. And these are all sort of high-end female entrepreneurs and business owners where our demographic are and also are aspiring to be. And once you put this all together into a wider media plan, it becomes very effective.
So here's the first ad in the context of that Shameless podcast.
And the nitty-gritty details, well, they're just next level. Welcome to Scandal from Shameless Podcast, the stories of the biggest celebrity controversies revisited.
You're refreshingly curious, Hendrix Gin?
Curious? How?
Allow me to explain. Cue the aroma. Cue the botanicals. Cue the taste. Cue the cumber.
I see.
For a refreshingly curious way to cue the first drink of summer, cue a Hendrix Gin, oddly infused and garnished with cucumber.
Cue the Hendrix.
And always drink the unusual responsibly.
Hi.
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 And then back to the show. Okay, so I hope you agree we've captured the sort of that Gatsby personality, set the ad in the sort of bar that we'd imagine that they'd use in their visual advertising, made the cucumber central to the concept, stop your snickering, and this ad works well in both a podcast environment as well as in the Spotify and radio environment. So we're going to move on very quickly, just because we've got 2 others to get through. The next
And the nitty-gritty
is explore travel. As with most travel company and their advertising, they focus a lot on the imagery of the destinations. And but in audio, we have an opportunity to actually bring to life one of their core points of difference, which is authentic local guides and smaller groups. So our team tapped into the listener's imagination and created something as equally as visual as their print ads, which was kind of showing a unique perspective of Rome's lesser-known turtle fountain.
Yeah, this is actually a sneak preview of something that's going into market now. And the Explore audience are people between the age of 40 to 60 with an interest in travel, culture, and with a bit of an adventurous side as well. So we've gone out and we've found the best global travel podcasts, but more for people that have an interest in the culture of the country rather than a beach club in Bali. And we've also picked shows on the audience, on the specific interests of that audience. So I'll come to that in a second. So the Travel Diaries, one of our flagship travel podcasts, the host speaks to different celebrities about their favorite ever travel destinations and cultural experiences. And I've found out that me and Shaggy actually have quite a lot in common. And the way we're doing this one is to target just the 40 and 60-year-olds that would be listening to this podcast, which is possible through a network. And we've done the same with the other podcasts in the Acast network, who we found to have the best selection of travel-related content that fits our audience. So that's why we went with them here. We also know that one of Explore's most popular destinations is Italy. So looking at Coffee Break Italian, the world's biggest Italian language learning podcast, we can assume that the audience is going to go and want to travel and practice their new language learning skills at some point. Similar rationale for the independent podcaster, the History of Italy podcast, where we think his audience probably are going to go and want to visit some of those cities and ruins that he talks about in the series that also happen to be Explore destinations. And this is just the example in the Travel Diaries.
We'll be uncovering their adventures around the world and the travel experiences and destinations that have shaped their lives.
Buonasera, my name is Marcello. I am a tour leader with Explore. Ciao. Come, Follow me. Behind this 200-year-old gate is the best view of one of Rome's finest fountains. Ah, bellissima. Look at the Renaissance detail, the sunlight in the bronze. Not everyone knows about Turtle Fountain, but you will if you explore. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel, explore.
So, and then the podcast continues. So, yeah, hopefully you agree, captured some of the visual components of the tour, but also brought it home that this is a tour, a local tour guide, absolutely local, because that accent is kind of hard to fake. Or if you shouldn't be faking it, even if you could. But that idea of being shown as a unique view of something that's lesser known, that all really supports what is at the core of Explore Travel. Okay, the final brand, arguably the most visual, is Revlon. Now, since launching their lipstick in 1939, Revlon have relied on print, TV, almost exclusively, but the audience profile is so perfect for the podcast audience. So we wanted to explore how they could look in audio. For the creative approach, the temptation was to get kind of esoteric and use really verbose language about trying to describe the shade of red or anything, but actually there's something a lot more relevant that we could tap into, and that is the loyalty that the listener has to her favorite podcast. So we've got a message that is still very visual, but also acknowledges the role Revlon have played in actually bringing to life, or actually supporting their favorite podcast and making it possible. So instead of a host-read ad, we have a listener-read ad. Still visual, as I said, and still firmly product-focused.
Yeah, and Revlon is also a fantastic example of a global FMCG brand with a really specific demographic. So in this case is where it really makes sense to go with a programmatic network buy for the scale. But it's still really important, in my opinion, to know exactly where that ad is ending up, so you don't end up like the menopause ad I mentioned at the start, racking up impressions against completely the wrong demographic. But luckily for Revlon, there are literally thousands, tens of thousands of podcasts out there with an almost 100% female audience. So it's just about finding the right network, the right podcasts that cater to the topics and that specific demographic as well. So, an obvious choice for a campaign like this, many of you will know Mamma Mia, all female related content, really chimes well for Revlon. But then also networks like Lemonada. They just signed the Meghan Markle podcast after her split from Spotify, and that's geared to a slightly older demographic of women. And you can even go one further and find out from the networks, from individual podcasters, which of their hosts do genuinely use Revlon and create, super authentic host-read ads that are going to be really chiming with their audience.
So here's that ad in the context of the You Beauty podcast.
Beautiful salon products everywhere, of course, but you do not need to spend the money if you don't want to. There's so many great things in your local supermarket or shopping online at Woolies or Coles.
Revlon would like to thank this podcast for giving our lips a well-earned break. Soon enough, they'll be front and center helping us charm and delight our way through the day. This time, with a fresh application of Revlon's Wine with Everything. A deep rougey red, but light enough for brunch, dinner, and wowing the in-laws. Wine with Everything, part of Revlon's super lustrous color lipstick range, minimizing lines for smooth, fuller-looking lips.
Hey, you beauty.
There we go. Back to the show. So we've tried to capture the sort of woman that we would imagine they would be using in their print advertising. American accent to just try and reinforce the heritage of the brand, but also just a bit of glamour and to make it cut through. And we could see her putting on her lipstick as she was talking and moving her lips and stuff. So it's another sort of visual component that we had to it, but also referencing the podcast and saying, thanks to this podcast for allowing us to have a little break ourselves. So that's all we have time for. Just a quick sort of race through three brands, but we hope we've opened your ears to, I guess, the potential for even the most visual brands in an audio environment, just by focusing in on and investing more into the creative, but we would say that. Yeah, that's hopefully given you some context. Is there anything more you want to add?
Yeah, just to also make sure that you're working with the most suitable networks and the best possible podcast.
Yeah, I think